Welcome to Anews. I'm Umar Taslim and you're watching Turkey's Diplomacy. Regional tensions are rising as Turkey and Saudi Arabia condemn Israel's expanding strikes in Syria, warning they undermine peace and violate sovereignty. At the same time, Gaza is continuing to descend into catastrophe with over 62,000 Palestinians killed, 5 more journalists targeted and millions displaced, while Israel deepens its occupation in the West Bank.
Turkey has strongly condemned Israel's ongoing military operations in Syria, saying they violate the country's sovereignty, territorial integrity, and regional stability. Ankara warned the expanding scope of the strikes directly undermines efforts to restore peace both within Syria and across the wider region.
We strongly condemn Israel's military operations in Syria, which violate the country's territorial integrity, unity, and sovereignty, and which have been expanding in scope. These attacks directly target efforts to establish stability and security in Syria and across our region. They must be brought to an end, and support for the Syrian government's efforts to ensure peace and calm throughout the country should be sustained.
Turkey reaffirmed its readiness to continue supporting Syria through mutual agreements and regional priorities, emphasizing cooperation based on respect for national sovereignty. As Syria navigates a new era, Ankara reiterated its position that lasting peace will depend on inclusive governance, national reconciliation, and the elimination of terrorist threats, principles it pledged to uphold in its future support for the country.
We will continue to support a vision for Syria that is in line with the legitimate aspirations of the Syrian people, one that is free from terrorism, secure, and preserves the country's territorial integrity.
Welcome back to the program. Anews editor Mustafa Kojakanar, welcome to the program.
Good morning, Umar.
Mustafa, let's start with the current developments, what's happening in Syria. Now, the Turkish Foreign Ministry has issued a statement saying whatever Israel is doing must be brought to an end, and the world, the international community, must support the Syrian government's efforts to ensure peace. Tell me about these latest strikes, these latest threats coming from the Israeli government.
Umar, Syria is right now navigating a new geopolitical era in the country, and Israeli security forces are regularly targeting Syria's political and military infrastructure. And yesterday, Turkish Foreign Ministry issued a written statement condemning Israel's latest military incursion into Syria. As you know, Turkey has been always accusing Israel of violating Syria's political sovereignty, national security, territorial integrity, and unitary structure. We know that Turkey has been always reiterating its strong support for Syria's efforts to rebuild and reconstruct war-torn country. We know that geopolitical landscape totally changed in Syria last December as the country's long-time ruling Assad family fled to Russia, and then opposition forces led by Ahmet al-Shara took control over the country. And since December, the new government in Damascus has been taking important steps to normalize the political situation in the country. Turkish decision makers have been always paying an official visit to Syria to discuss the bilateral relationships between two important neighbors in the Middle East. But personally, I think that Turkey's rising geopolitical influence in Syria is pushing Israel's buttons, and Turkey's diplomatic support for Syria's recovery, I think, is disturbing Israeli decision makers, because we know that Israeli foreign policy makers have been striving to make Israel the only hegemon in the Middle East, and Turkey's growing influence in the Middle East, as I said, is pushing Israel's buttons. As you know, Israel's embattled Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu visited the United States this year to meet with U.S. President Donald Trump. he openly urged Trump to take steps against Turkey's geopolitical influence in the region. But on the contrary to expectations of Netanyahu, Trump publicly sided with Turkey and Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, and Trump urged Netanyahu to be reasonable if Israel wants to deal with its security problems with Turkey. On the other hand, we know that Azerbaijan is trying to mediating and facilitating security talks between Turkish and Israeli decision makers in terms of de-escalating rising geopolitical tensions in the region. Yes, Turkey reiterates at every opportunity that Turkish military forces do not want any military confrontation with Israel over Syria right now, but it doesn't mean that Turkey will allow any fait accompli in Syria. I think that Turkey is determined to protect its national security interests in the Middle Eastern country.
Mustafa, also Saudi Arabia has condemned Israel's ongoing incursions into Syria, and we've been seeing what has happened over the past few months as well. How would Israel's rising aggression impact these countries in the Middle East?
Mar, we know that Israel is not only taking aim at Palestinians living in the occupied Gaza Strip or West Bank. Israel has been always targeting other countries' political sovereignty and territorial integrity. We know that Israel has been regularly targeting Hezbollah positions in Lebanon. Israel is targeting Iran's nuclear facilities and military installations. On the other hand, Israeli security forces have been targeting Houthi rebels in Yemen. And it is clearly showing that Israel has been pursuing expansionist geopolitical agenda in the region. Of course, it is posing a huge threat to other countries in the region as well. And Saudi Arabia is also concerned about Israel's rising and biggest geopolitical agenda in the region. Yesterday, as you mentioned, Saudi Arabia also condemned Israel's military incursion into Syria. We know that Saudi Arabia is one of the most important partners for Syria's efforts to rebuild and reconstruct the country. As you know, in May, U.S. President Donald Trump visited 3 Middle Eastern countries in the region. He visited Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and United Arab Emirates. And on the sidelines of the Gulf Cooperation Council summit in Saudi Arabia's capital, Riyadh, Trump met with Syria's President Ahmed al-Shara. Following this important meeting, we know that United States lifted sanctions on Syria, and it is clearly showing that Saudi Arabia is also enjoying good relationships with Syria and its new rulers in Damascus. I think that, as you know, Turkey has been always calling for regional solutions for regional problems. Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan is saying that regional countries should be united in the Middle East in terms of addressing security challenges posed by Israel and Israeli security forces. I think that if Saudi Arabia and Turkey cooperate with each other to rebuild and reconstruct Syria, it will yield positive results in terms of dealing with the security challenges in the region.
Mustafa, over 14 years, we saw violence, it continued in Syria for more than 14 years. Refugees came into Turkey, millions of people were displaced, millions were killed as well by the Assad regime. Now, Mustafa, how is Turkey helping the reconstruction of Syria? Because this is the most important aspect. Because analysts have said and critics have said, they've criticized Israel for these actions. They are saying that Israel's only attacking Syria to destabilize not just Syria, but also the region. So how is Turkey planning to help Syria when it comes to reconstruction?
Omar, as you know, Syria had been going through civil years for 14 years, and during these years, Turkey was one of the most important countries supporting Syrian people's aspirations for democracy and new administration in the country. As you know, Turkey conducted open-door policy for Syrians fleeing Assad regime's brutal attacks on civilians. Turkey tried to increase international awareness about the Syrian people's legitimate rights in the country. But Assad regime turned a blind eye to Turkey's security demands and people's lives in the region. And Turkey's support for Syrian people yielded positive results last December, and geopolitical situation totally changed in the country. And since then, Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan, Turkish National Defense Minister Yaşar Güler, and National Intelligence Chief Ibrahim Kalın have been regularly paying an official visit to Syria to discuss bilateral relationships. On the other hand, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan welcomed his new Syrian counterpart Ahmet al-Shara in Ankara, Istanbul and Antalya to reiterate Turkey's ironclad support for Syria's unitary structure and territorial integrity. On the other hand, other Turkish ministers have been in close contact with their Syrian counterparts to rebuild and reconstruct the country. And Turkey has been signing several agreements with Syria in terms of contributing to efforts conducted by Syrian decision makers. It is evident that Turkey is determined to give and do what can it be done to rebuild and reconstruct the war-torn country. On the other hand, Syrian decision makers are always praising Turkey's diplomatic and political efforts for Syria's reconstruction. But as I said that there are also many problems in Syria right now. There is a PYD-YPG problem in the northern part of the country. As you know, during civil years, Obama administration was looking for local forces to cope with the Daesh problem in the region, and they cooperated with PKK terror groups, Syrian offshoot, PYD-YPG, in terms of eliminating the Daesh threat. But since the very beginning of the crisis, Turkey has been reiterating that one terror group cannot be defeated by using another one. We know that Turkey conducted its own anti-terror campaign against Daesh in 2016, and Turkey's military operation paved the way for the obliteration of Daesh terror group. But after that situation, United States continued to give its strong support for PYD-YPG terrorists in northern Syria. And we know that this March, new rulers in Damascus signed a new agreement with PYD-YPG dominated Syrian Democratic Forces. Right now, Syria has been expecting concrete steps from PYD-YPG terrorists in terms of integrating themselves into the Syrian military forces. Turkey has been also closely monitoring the latest developments about the political situation and political future for Syria. I think that if PYD-YPG tries to establish another political separate structure in northern part of the country, I think that Turkish military forces will be compelled to pursue another counter-terrorism operations in the region.
Well, sir, these were similar statements given by the Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan as well last week, right? Because he strongly criticized the SDF. He said that SDF might step back from its promises. So tell me more about those statements that were given by the Turkish Foreign Minister.
Umar, last week we know that Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan hosted his Syrian counterpart in Ankara to exchange views on the latest security issues related to PYD-YPG in the northern part of the country. We know that right now there is a terror-free Turkey initiative in Turkey, and personally I think that it is also meaning that terror-free region, because we know that PKK terror group is not only posing a huge threat to Turkey's national security and political stability, they are also targeting Syria and Iraq. PKK terror group is still active in northern Iraq and northern Syria. We know that Turkey conducted several counter-terrorism operations both in northern Iraq and northern Syria in terms of ensuring Turkey's border security. And right now, Turkey has been expecting concrete steps from both Baghdad and Damascus to eliminate the terror threat in the region. As you know, as we mentioned, PYD-YPG dominated SDF reached a new deal with Syrian government in March, but since then we know that PYD-YPG has not been taking important steps to normalize the political situation in the country. They are still not laying their weapons, and they are still seeking new allies to ensure that their political future will be protected by them. And within this context, last week, Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan warned PYD-YPG against any provocations in the Middle East. As we mentioned that right now there are some discussions between Turkish and Syrian decision makers. I think that according to reliable sources on the ground, Syrian military forces are preparing for counter-terrorism operations in the northern part of the country. And right now, Turkish decision makers have been cooperating with their Syrian counterparts in terms of realizing these planned counter-terrorism operations. And some sources claim that Turkey will not be directly involved in the situation, and Turkish military forces will give military intelligence and air support for Syrian military forces. I think that if PYD-YPG cooperate with Syria or Turkey, it will be good for the regional security. Otherwise, Turkey and Syria will take their own steps in terms of normalizing the political situation and ensuring the border security between two important neighbors in the Middle East.
Mustafa, thanks for those updates. We'll be right back with you.
You're welcome, Mar.
Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has called for national unity and solidarity, emphasizing that Turks must stand together to confront both internal and external security challenges facing the country.
Millet olarak bundan 954 yıl önce Malazgirt Ovası'nda yazılan kahramanlık destanından aldığımız cesaret ve özgüvenle istikbale yürüyoruz.
Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan made a speech at the 954th anniversary celebrations of the Malazgirt victory in eastern province of Muş on Tuesday.
Ecdadın mübarek kanlarıyla bizlere vatan eylediği bu toprakları ebedi yurdumuz olarak muhafaza etmek için var gücümüzle çalışıyoruz. Her türlü engele, her türlü engellemeye, her türlü sabotaja rağmen yeniden büyük ve güçlü Türkiye için kelimenin tam anlamıyla çırpınıyoruz.
Turkish control of Anatolia began with the Battle of Malazgirt in 1071, which saw the Seljuk Turks led by Sultan Alparslan defeat a much larger Byzantine army. The victory accelerated the decline of the Byzantine Empire and led to more Turks settling in the region, paving the way for both the Ottoman Empire and the modern Republic of Turkey.
Bugün kendi vatandaşlarıyla birlikte mazlum ve mağdurların da umudu haline dönüşen bir devlete sahibiz. Bugün Filistin davasına her platformda tüm imkanlarıyla sahip çıkan, İsrail'in alçak zulümleri karşısında Gazze'li kardeşlerini asla yalnız bırakmayan bir ülkemiz ve hükümetimiz var.
President Erdogan called for strong unity and solidarity among Turks in order to deal with the internal and external security challenges.
Yönünü Ankara'ya ve Şam'a dönenler kazanacak. Kardeşlik ve komşuluk hukukunu gözetenler kazanacak. Kıblesini şaşırıp kendilerine yeni yabancı patronlar arayanlar ise eninde sonunda kaybedecektir.
Welcome back to the program. Now let's take a look at the front page of Daily Sabah. Mustafa, we were watching Turkish President Erdogan address the 954th anniversary of the victory of the Malazgirt battle. And the message was simple. It was about unity, it was about peace. And the picture here on Daily Sabah, as we can see, Erdogan addressing an ecstatic crowd in Mush. Now, Mustafa, tell me more about this message of peace, unity, and safety, not just for Turks, but Kurds, Arabs, and Syrians.
Umar, yesterday Turkey celebrated the 954th anniversary of the Malazgirt victory, and personally I think that Malazgirt victory paved the way for the establishment of Ottoman Empire and modern Republic of Turkey. And speaking at the Malazgirt victory celebrations in eastern province of Mush in eastern part of the country yesterday, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan reiterated Turkey's determination to protect the homeland against internal and security challenges. President Recep Tayyip Erdogan also called for unity and solidarity among Turkish people to deal with the internal and external security challenges. And President Erdogan also said that those who turn their faces to Ankara and Damascus will prevail, and those who seek new foreign patrons will fail. And it is a direct message to PKK terror groups, Syrian offshoot PYD, YPG, because right now we know that PYD, YPG dominated STF is trying to establish new communications with Israel to bring more destruction to the war-torn country, Syria. I think that cooperation and collaboration between Turkish and Syrian military forces and decision makers will yield positive results in terms of ensuring and upholding the rights of Kurdish people, because Turkey has been always accusing PYD, YPG of exploiting the rights of Kurdish people living in the northern part of the country. I think that Kurdish people are also against the PYD, YPG structure in northern Syria. I hope that PYD, YPG dominated STF will be committing to its promises under the deal signed with new government in Damascus. And if something wrong in the northern part of the country, I think Turkey will not hesitate to take diplomatic, military and political steps in terms of normalizing the political situation in the country.
Mustafa, when we talk about terror groups, for example, Daesh, PKK, YPG, PYD, even STF, tell me, how is Turkey dealing with this? We know that the Terror-Free Turkey initiative, obviously, it's ongoing. Tell me, at what stage is it at this point?
Umar, as you know, Turkey conducted several military operations in northern Syria to eliminate the terror threat. But Turkey is not only pursuing military steps against terrorist organizations. Turkey is also pursuing political and diplomatic steps. As you know, Turkey is trying to strengthen its bilateral cooperation with both Syria and Iraq to discuss the possible political steps in terms of eliminating terror threat in the region. On the other hand, Turkey is increasing its diplomatic efforts with regional and international stakeholders in terms of increasing the awareness about the terrorism scourge in the region, and it is clearly yielding positive results in terms of bringing peace and stability to the region. Right now, both Syria and Iraq are praising Turkey's military, diplomatic and political steps to deal with the security challenges in the region. As we mentioned, Turkey is pursuing a terror-free Turkey initiative right now, and it is clearly evolving into terror-free region. I think that cooperation among Turkey, Iraq and Syria will yield positive results in terms of coping with the security challenges posed by the PKK terror group and its Syrian offshoot PYD-YPG.
Mustafa, thanks for that, for those updates from Daily Sabah.
Thank you, Mark.
Now let's take a look at this news report, and we'll be right back.
Palestinian families fled Gaza City on Tuesday after a night of Israeli shelling on the outskirts. Local health authorities said at least 34 people were killed in Israeli strikes in the enclave overnight and on Tuesday, including 18 people around Gaza City. Shahar al-Masri told Reuters Israeli forces bombed the buildings around her and her family. Then a plane flew over and announced they had 10 minutes to leave. You see, she says, people are leaving without taking anything. She adds, what can we do? The Israeli military has said its forces are operating in the area to locate weapons and destroy tunnels. Israel is now preparing to launch a new offensive in Gaza City, targeting what it describes as Hamas's last bastion. That planned operation has been met with international condemnation, as well as fierce resistance within Israel. Police arrested protesters in Tel Aviv on Tuesday who demanded Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu negotiate an end to the nearly 2-year war that would free Israeli hostages held by Hamas.
Israel is standing against Netanyahu and his regime.
Nimrod Cohen is the father of hostage Yehuda Cohen.
Another day to pressure Netanyahu and force him to end the war and get a hostage deal.
Israel's strikes on Gaza included 2 on the Nasser hospital in Khan Yunis on Monday, which killed 20 people, including 5 journalists.
The killing of journalists in Gaza should shock the world, not into stunned silence, but into action, demanding accountability and justice.
On Tuesday, the Office of the United Nations High Commission for Human Rights condemned the attacks on the press. A first strike killed Reuters cameraman Hussam al-Masri, who was broadcasting a live shot from the hospital. That attack drew other journalists and first responders to the scene. Minutes later, a second strike killed and wounded others. The journalists killed included Mariam Abu Daga, who freelanced for the Associated Press. A Reuters photographer, Hatem Khalid, seen here in the red t-shirt, was injured. The Israeli military on Tuesday said an initial inquiry into the attack showed its troops identified what it called a camera, quote, positioned by Hamas in the area to observe Israel's forces. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's office on Monday said Israel deeply regretted what he called a, quote, tragic mishap.
Welcome back to the program. Joining us now from the Pakistani capital is political analyst Javed Rana. Javed, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Umar.
Javed, we've been seeing Israeli attacks not just in Yemen, in Syria, in Iran over the past few months. How are these plans, how are these expansion plans, this Israeli aggression reshaping the Middle East at this point?
I think the underlying message that Israel wants to believe is there, that since Iran is on a decline, Iran's nuclear program has been taken out, and then there is also a change of guard in Lebanon. Hezbollah is not there. There is also a change of guard in Damascus. And from Israel's perspective, there is a weak government. And then obviously in the West Bank, occupied West Bank, parts of which have been once again have been occupied. The territory is being controlled every next day. They're controlling more and more territory. And I think all these indicators are which gives abetment to Israel and which gives encouragement to USA that this is the time to expand the apartheid state of Israel further. Its borders should be expanded. And then there should be reshaping of the entire Middle East. A Middle East where Iran would be weak. It's no longer as powerful as it used to be because it's all proxies, more particularly Hezbollah, on which it was relying upon. It has been degraded militarily to a point that it is no longer resisting against the apartheid state. And then Shia militias in Iraq and also in Syria, by and large, those have been militarily degraded, and I think some of which have been decapitated. So in that border context, there is only one challenge, and that is of Houthis. Houthis are still resisting, though it's not as frequently as they used to be. They've been carrying out missiles attacks, rocket attacks from Yemen onto the apartheid Israel, and that is a source of disturbance. So in that broader context, if we see now Israel has more territorial hold of Lebanon, particularly of its southern region, and in a similar fashion, we know that it has already occupied parts of Syria. It has gone much beyond Golan Heights, which was occupied by Israel back in 1967. So, and then every next day we hear more and more attacks inside Syria under the garb of supporting minorities like Druze in Syria, which everybody knows that this is the not reason, because Israel is at least concerned about Druze, and even Druze are discriminated inside the apartheid Israel. That is a kind of a justification to expand its more territory. And then I have already explained the West Bank is already under military oppression. In that broader context, I think the situation does not bode well for the Arab North. They should understand their turn is the next, because all these Arab countries are part of a greater Israel.
Javed, unfortunately, over the past few days, we've been seeing some distressing images where Israel has been attacking journalists, Israel has been attacking aid workers. We saw how the Nasser hospital was targeted, not once but twice. And then, the official death toll that the authorities in Gaza say is that 250 journalists have been killed. But obviously, we believe that there are more. You are a seasoned journalist as well, Javed. Tell me, what is the reason behind the desperation to silence these journalists?
Well, the broader picture is, the macro picture is that the Israel has no resistance from anywhere in the world. To the best of my understanding, there are just two resistance. One is a hard resistance, the other is a soft resistance. Hard resistance is coming from Houthis, unfrequented military attacks inside apartheid Israel. That is a source of disturbance for Israel, but that's not a big deal. But there is a soft resistance. And that resistance are the Palestinian journalists working with a different international news network, more particularly with Al Jazeera. Since I was a part of this channel for 4 years, so I have fairly good idea how things move there. These Palestinian journalists are the greatest source of the strength of Al Jazeera network. They were on the war front inside Afghanistan, inside every country wherever there was American imposed war or Israeli imposed war. So in a similar fashion, they've been reporting, streaming the genocide of the apartheid Israel. And that soft resistance has completely, dramatically changed the international public opinion. And that is why now people in the West, they love to hate Israel. This is the biggest challenge. That is a very strong evidence. When everybody says, sometimes many people would say that everything is changing, but only the change is not changing. The process of the change evolves. It is a simply matter of time when there will be turn of apartheid Israel to be held accountable. This is against the law of nature. If somebody thinks, if Israel thinks, if Americans think that they would never be held accountable, no, that would happen, because time and tide wait for none. When their turn will be there, then no one will be there to rescue. Now, in that broader context, since the biggest threat to Israel is, frankly speaking, is Al Jazeera network. It has played havoc with Israel's plan to conduct genocide. It has exposed it. In the International Criminal Court, the ICJ, all these preliminary judgments and arrest warrants coming from all these tribunals, that is a part of the reason is Al Jazeera network, because it has live streamed all these images, which has registered in the mind in the West. And that is why now even the Western political leaders who are otherwise compromised by Mossad, now they feel threatened. And that's why sometimes for the public consumption, they have to make statement. We have seen there has been crackdown on Palestinian demonstrators all over the West, in Europe, in the USA. Nonetheless, I think the scale of the public anger against Israel is growing day by day. And there are apprehensions that in near future, there will be more violent attacks against the Jewish community, though I believe that every member of the Jewish community is not involved what Israel has been doing. But that is basically all doing of the Zionist network. But in that broader context, I think that is why we have seen more and more attacks against journalists. That is why we have seen that the journalists are being killed. And most of these journalists, large number of them, all the media workers, they are the Palestinians. They have a cause to fight for because that is their land. And that is why we have not seen international journalists pouring into Gaza. Partly Israel is not allowing it, but the biggest reason is that nobody is daring to enter into Gaza because journalists are one of the leading target of the apartheid Israel. And then I think Israel perhaps knows that in the long run, they are going to face the music in shape of a very negative public opinion. And sooner or later, I think Israel would be held accountable and the credit would certainly go to the Palestinian journalist.
Political analyst Javed Rana, thank you for that analysis. It was a pleasure having you on the program. Anews editor Mustafa Khoja-Kenar, thank you for being with us in the studios.
Thank you, Umar.
That brings us to the end of our program. Thanks for joining us. Bye for now.